Tradewind Gypsies, Chapter 1. Written and read by Malcolm Russell. Copyright 2000. Audible copyright 2025. All rights reserved. When I said I was going to build an ocean-going yacht in my Rhodesian back garden, the reaction was swift and unanimous. My friends laughed. My wife sighed, and my dog Abner simply stared as if to say, "You've finally lost it, haven't you?" The huge structure that arose in our back garden looked for all the world like a 50-foot-long aviary. The wire bird mesh that should have formed the cage was instead hanging down under a light corrugated iron roof, shaped like a 38-foot-long boat. A squeal of protesting rubber on the road outside our Helensvale home. Heated revving as the driver backed up for a better view. Neither Hazel nor I looked up. We were getting used to it. The gate clanged. So this one was coming for a closer look. We braced ourselves for the usual barrage of questions. Ferroconcrete boats were a rare sight in Rhodesia in the early 70s, and with good reason. The nearest friendly saltwater harbour available to us was Durban, nearly 1,000 miles away. I turned on the ladder to face the owner of the broad, friendly Rhodesian accent as his question boomed up at me. "Hey, man, is that a boat?" "Yes." "For the lake, eh? For Kariba?" "No, for the sea." "Okay. And you cover it with planks, eh?" "No, you plaster it with concrete." An even broader grin. "Ach, no, man, give me a break. Be serious now." Well, I suppose it was time for a break anyway. I climbed down the ladder, put aside the pliers, and began an explanation about displacement and how it all worked. In a country where every other medium was either unobtainable or beyond the expertise of a professional broadcaster, ferro seemed to be the ideal material. This visitor distinguished himself with a rapid grasp of the principles involved, and was soon nodding enthusiastically as I pointed out how the frames, making up the ribs of the boat, had been welded and then hung in a row from a centre girder running the 50-foot length of the pipe frame shed. The questions, coming more as answers needing confirmation, came even more quickly. "So then you run these light reinforcing bars from bow to stern on the outside of the frame to give the shape, eh? And then a heavier tube from the bow goes right the way along the keel to the transom. Now, that's neat." I looked at my visitor with growing respect. He knew what a transom was. I'd had to look it up to discover it was the blunt back end of a boat. "And then you cover the whole thing with wire mesh, you tie it to the frame, and then bung up all the holes with plaster." Interesting. Now, out of thin air, Mr. Magic produced a tape measure. "And look at this, eh? The frames are 3-foot tube apart. That makes good sense. You put a bulkhead on every second frame, and you end up with a 6'4" wide cabin, just the right length for a bunk." Well, now he was way ahead of me. I hadn't thought of that, but it made sense. "How do you reckon to fit this thing out? I mean, masts and portholes, cleats, anchors, winches, all that sort of thing." I hadn't the slightest idea. Fitting was a long way off, and I'd learnt that trying to envisage all the problems at once would put one off altogether. The grin grew broader. "Hey, man, do you want a hand?" I was to learn that Tony Turner had already built 2 boats in wood. The Elvor was a 50-foot motor cruiser on Lake Kariba. The other, called Little Nook, was a yacht that had been driven aground and lost in a foul storm off the South African wild coast. It's not called the Wild Coast for nothing. Tony and the 2 crew had been lucky to escape with their lives. And I was also to discover that Tony was one of those rare people who offers a hand and means it. When I'd pretty much finished the hull, the time had come to start the fitting out in marine ply and timber. It had been a family joke that the only thing I'd ever made in wood was a small picture frame, and it ended up as an egg box. Tony dropped by one afternoon to give a hand and watched me sawing a piece of choice Iroko plank. But despite every effort, I simply could not saw a straight line. Then Tony had a go, and he couldn't either. "Tell you what, man," he said, "look, why don't we knock off for today and I'll get some stuff together for next weekend." I was grateful for the excuse to quit and to go and think about this mad thing I'd undertaken. Next Saturday, a blue Datsun truck pulled up, with Tony at the wheel. A large wooden toolbox containing old saws, planes, routers, set squares, and tools I'd never seen before was dumped on the ground. The only difference between these tools and mine was these were razor sharp. "Now let's have a go." Tony was never one to preach, but I immediately learnt the value of sharp tools. The cut was dead straight. Tony was works manager of his father's caravan construction company and a genius with his hands. He never interfered. He'd set me straight and then leave me to it, calling in occasionally with words of encouragement and hints on ways to tackle problems as they arose. I also discovered that he too had decided to build a boat in Ferro, while at the same time building a house on a small holding close by. The months slipped by. Nearly every Saturday and Sunday I'd begin at 7 a.m. and finish when it was too dark to see. Hazel kept the tea coming every 2 hours and would take away the previous mug, invariably still half full, cold, and floating in wood shavings. Inevitably, talk of boats and boat building would creep into my work on radio and television, and the trickle of visitors became a flood. It finally dawned. Many Rhodesians have a romance with the sea, and it became apparent that a lot more boats were in embryo around the country. Long before the internet, Hazel had the idea to get boat builders together to share their common problems and individual talents, and so we launched the Amateur Boat Building and Cruising Association. Membership boasted a marine engineer, a marine electrician, and a buying and building advisory service. We even had an expert on celestial navigation. He happened also to be a Roman Catholic minister, so we figured he was probably close enough to heaven to be well qualified. The club ran on the buddy system. No charge to join, and no one paid for advice or assistance, except by reciprocation in any way they chose. By the time I left to try my luck on the waters, more than 40 boats between 26-foot and 65-foot were in various stages of construction. My most reliable references were 2 books, both written by Eric Hiscock, called Cruising Under Sail and Voyaging Under Sail. And then I learned that he and his wife Susan had been delayed in Wanderer 4 while on their 3rd yachting trip around the world. I tracked them down to Cape St. Francis in South Africa and gave them a call. Then we flew them to Rhodesia to see the country and at the same time to give a talk to the club. But then my interview with them on television, along with the showing of their film, stoked even more interest. This remarkable, quietly spoken couple's books have never been bettered, and my autographed copies are well-worn treasures. And then, suddenly, we were into racing too. Tony, a restlessly energetic character, completed his own 40-foot ferro boat and his house in just 9 months flat. He then got it onto a trailer and down to Cape Town and entered the Cape to Rio yacht race. He stretched himself well into the red at the same time, so the club began a fundraising campaign to assist. We sold the name of the yacht to the highest bidder. A Bindura miner paid $1,000, and he called the boat Gwen. She, it turned out, was suitably impressed and married him. And she also persuaded George Hodge to spend another $1,000 to buy himself a crew position. But now it became a scramble to find experienced crew. First, we found a navigator, Barry Johnson. He was a tobacco farmer and an ex-World War II submariner, and he was the oldest member of the crew. No GPS in those days. This was strictly sexton stuff. Skipper would be the youngest on board. Tommy Addison was home briefly to visit his parents after crewing a yacht called 33 Export in the Whitbread round-the-world race. His experience in captaincy came when Export's skipper had been tragically lost at sea during the world race. And then, of course, there was the remarkable Tony, the only other member of the 8-man crew with any experience at all. Where was I in all of this? Well, I'd ended up as crew manager, disappointed at not being able to join the crew, but for the very best of all possible reasons. Hazel, after 12 years of marriage, and after I'd long given up hope, was expecting. But in Cape Town, the roadies made their presence felt in the most unexpected way. Berthed alongside a beautiful yacht called Calypso, the crews became great friends, despite the wide difference in experience and expertise. One of the Gwen crew was overheard saying that he was going downstairs to the kitchen, much to the amusement of the Calypso crew. They were quick to point out that the nautical terminology demanded going below to the galley. But instead of derision, the roadies got imitation. It saw the launch of a new, simpler language that exploded and was rapidly adopted, much to the grudging amusement of the older traditionalists. Port and starboard to the former landlubbers became left and right. The boom became the headbanger. Cabin was replaced by bedroom, with beds, not bunks. Loos replaced heads, ropes and windy thingamies replaced sheets and winches, and naturally the bow became the pointy end. At least one term that has survived and is often still used today is hooks, another word for anchors. But beating to windward became going uphill, life jackets, floaty coats, fenders, bobble jobs, dinghies, puddle jumpers, and the helmsman now has a steering wheel. The contagion spread through the fleet at a speed that would have had Nelson turning in his rum. But when it came to the business of racing, the challenge was serious. Take the lead and stay there. Against all odds, and after breaking her steering 2 days out from Cape Town and helming with the emergency tiller, Gwen took both line and handicap honours in the cruising class and finished well up the large field and ahead of a large number of very prestigious yachts. The effort cost Tony dearly. His father, against the entire venture from the start, had warned him that his position with the firm would not be held for him. So now Tony was broke, but not broken. He began building similar yachts professionally, and before long his small holding had 5 under construction. Best of all, though, he expanded the service, turning out locally designed and made aluminium masts, booms, bronze blocks, cleats, hatches, and anchors, all finding a ready local and export market to South Africa. Hazel was determined to become a mother. For 10 years she had explored every possible option, and now hope rested in a young and highly skilled gynecologist called Eric Simons. The operation he had in mind was to replace a fallopian tube with a plastic tube to allow the fertilization of an egg. He also had a wicked sense of humour. He told me the op was called a tubal plastiotomy, or, if I preferred, a plastic tubuloptomy. You can guess which I took. But it was seriously advanced medicine back in 1974. Hazel said that on the day of the operation, and while she was in pre-med before the anaesthetic, Eric had asked her if she had brought her plastic tube. No, she replied groggily. I didn't know I was supposed to. Not to worry. I've got a piece of old radiator hose in the boot of the car. That'll do. But remarkably, this long-shot gamble worked. Fast forward to 9 p.m. on the night before Christmas Eve, nearly bedtime for me, with an early morning news shift at 5 a.m. tomorrow. A heavily pregnant Hazel sat comfortably close on the couch as we watched what my good friend and fellow continuity announcer, stone-faced Ian Dixon, would call another bow-legged ballet. This one called Bonanza. Our handsome black Labrador Abner was asleep and snoring quietly on the parquet floor, completely unmoved by Cartwright happenings on the Ponderosa Ranch. Hazel is eating a sour, crisp, green mango, feet up on a stool to ease her back, but she is ready. Her drop-and-go hospital bag, ready. Pram in the corner, ready. Formula in the fridge, ready. Name for a girl? Laura. Ready. Name for a boy? Not a clue, but we'll get there. At around midnight, I awoke to the sound of a steam engine thundering through my dreams. It was Hazel, well into the stentorian rhythmic breathing we had both learnt in the antenatal course. I stumbled out of bed, and she gasped that she thought it was just indigestion from the mango. I don't think so. This was more likely nature's way of saying, move your butt. The prenatal course did have at least some advice for the pending father. High among it was not to panic, stay calm, and not to appear rushed while gathering the necessities to drive to hospital. I remember clearly doing my very best to follow the rules and taking charge with reassuring conversation as I dressed. "Well," I said, in the calmest voice I could manage, "the prenatal course gave you full instructions on what to wear, but nothing about what I should wear to the hospital." Fortunately, the course also warned that the wife is likely to undergo a severe sense of humour failure when facing the big event. Much later, she confirmed, she could have killed me. Borrowdale Road was bumpy and potholed, and it wasn't the smoothest ride to the hospital. I couldn't get above 30 miles an hour, but the steam breathing didn't miss a beat. The Lady Chancellor Hospital finally appeared in the headlights. I parked in the emergency reception area and got out to fetch a wheelchair. All of the 3 available had flat tires, so I grabbed the nearest one, and Hazel climbed in, putting her carefully packed bag on what remained of her lap. We clunked our way down the corridor, only to meet Eric Simon coming the other way. He'd just handled a delivery and looked surprised. But he took Hazel off for a quick examination, and a few minutes later came back with the reassurance that, she has a way to go yet, so I'm going to beetle off home for a nap. He went one way, Hazel the other, as she was trundled off to a ward. 10 minutes later, the midwife hustled her into the labour room. They'd called the doctor, but knew it was too advanced and he'd never get back in time. I had a short go at the breathing. I needed it. I needed settling down. Useless. I wasn't brave enough to attend the birth. These were, after all, old-fashioned days, and I contented myself reading an ancient, coverless National Geographic in the waiting room. Terrible shame about that Titanic, don't you think? The midwife and Hazel were by now firm friends, and remained so long after the big event. And finally, it was time for Dad to go and greet the new mother and child, and of course claim at least some of the credit. Although Hazel looked exhausted, she was also radiant. She had a mission-accomplished look about her, as I offered massive congratulations. And now the time had come to introduce myself to the new addition to the family. I walked around to the crib and peered inside, to get the shock of my life. It was a girl, and the poor thing looked just like me. Eric arrived a few minutes later, very apologetic for missing the birth, but he agreed that this was indeed a Russell. His comment was classic, and I quoted it frequently. "We know who the father was, but who's the mother?" There is a happy ending. Laura got Hazel's serene good looks by the time she was 2, and she's kept them ever since. So Laura's arrival threw a new and very important question into the ring, one I had put into the later box before. Does a clueless landlubber take a wife and brand-new baby to sea? Is it a risk one can afford? I'd never so much as stood on the deck of a small ocean-going yacht, and I was only barely competent in DIY. Did we have enough information to make an informed decision? Like Scarlett O'Hara, I'll think about that tomorrow. I'd forgotten the name of the movie, but actually it foretold the answer.